Welcome everyone to the presentation by the winning team at this 10th annual Diamond Dollars case competition at the SABR Analytics Conference. We had 20 student teams presenting to a panel of judges from Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball teams in this year's event. We had teams from high schools, undergrads, and grad programs across the US. There were 5 winners in their respective presentation rooms. Each room had a winner. The winners were Horace Mann School from the Bronx, one of the entries from Syracuse team number 2, Tufts, Cornell, and the overall winner of the entire competition, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, who you'll hear from in just a moment. So the case prompt this year was really designed to capitalize on the explosion of baseball data in recent years. To put this in perspective, for the first 150 years or so of professional baseball, that's over 190,000 games, that now constitutes less than 0.1% of the data on record that describes what happened during a baseball game. The last 6 years since the debut of StatCast essentially consists of the other 99.9+%. So I thought it would be interesting to see how student teams would address one of the most enduring questions in the game today. How well did the starting pitcher pitch? Bill James developed a metric some 35 years ago called game score. With the data that was, of course, available at the time, Tom Tango subsequently updated the metric with a modified version, but all of that predates the StatCast era. So the student teams were challenged with developing a present day version of a game score type metric that went deep into the data to evaluate a starting pitcher's performance. And given the size of starting pitcher contracts these days, I guess you could say that that's the $300 million question. Although I can assure you the winners of the competition will retain their amateur status, with their prize being the chance to really just present to all of you. So with that, I'll turn it over to the University of Chicago Booth School of Business winning team.
Hi everyone. Jacob, quick mic check.
Yep, you sound good.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. We're excited to do this.
Hi everyone. I'm Omar. I'm joined today by Cameron, Jacob, and Trevor. We are the Chicago Booth team, and today we will present to you our 4-tool pitching metric. Our goal in the conception of 4 tools was to create a metric that serves as a diagnostic for starting pitcher performances in the same vein as game score and game score 2. So to add context, we'll quickly go over both game scores. The original game score, created by Bill James, uses the pitching line from the traditional box score and sets the baseline pitching performance equal to 50. Over the years, it's been noted that the average game score is around 50, and since that's normally distributed, we'll take the average starting pitcher performance to be 50. Game score 2 is Tom Tango's adaptation of the original game score. It includes 4 notable adjustments. 1, home runs are now included. 2, walks are valued equally to hits. 3, the beginning score for a starter is now 40. And 4, the metric reduces the bias towards pitchers that face a low number of batters. So here we have just a quick comparison of both game scores. On the left, you have the top 10 game scores, and on the right, you'll see the bottom 10 game scores. We'll look first at the top 10. You'll see that the ranking and the order are relatively the same. So between game score 1 and game score 2, those are unchanged. When you get a little closer and you see Justin Verlander at the top, that's his no-hitter. And you see that the raw scores are different. And so Justin Verlander for game score 2 benefits for going 9 innings in his no-hitter. On the right, we'll quickly look at Mike Fiers. He is the 5th person from the bottom there on the right. And you'll see that his game scores are drastically different. Game score 1 is -6, game score 2 is -28. So now in game score 2, or Tom Tango has included home runs, and so he gets a really huge penalty for giving up 5 home runs. So the positives of game score. First, it's simple. It uses a traditional box score, and with some simple arithmetic, anyone can calculate it. And because it uses that traditional box score, it's comparable across time. We've been using this box score for over a century. Now the negatives. The outcomes, hits, runs, are influenced by factors outside of a pitcher's control. And because of that, it lacks diagnostic capability. We truly don't get a sense of a starting pitcher's true performance. And so that brings an end to my little history lesson. I'll hand it off to Cam to talk about our 4 tools approach.
Thanks, Omar. So our approach was to find a score that focuses on the hitter versus pitcher matchup and remove any of those outside factors, such as the umpire, fielding errors, or park factors. So we scraped data from Baseball Savant, such as launch angle, exit velocity, barrels, and pitch locations on a pitch-by-pitch basis, and combine them into a pitcher's start. So we had about 4,800 different starts for the year. We combined that data with the data we got from Vint, which is the more traditional data that you see in a box score. And we ran a machine learning model to find out which of those stats were most highly predictive of runs. We ended up using a ridge regression and came up with 14 variables as the 14 most important variables to being predictive of runs. We assign weights to those variables by regressing them on game score to give a traditional 0 to 100 score, which we'll see later. And the end result was a 4-tool pitching metric. So we binned these 14 variables based on category and came up with the 4 tools. To our knowledge, there's no tool metric for pitchers comparable to the 5-tool metric we see for player scouting. So the 4 tools we came up with were avoiding hard contact, command, game control, and the stuff. The baseline score, or the score a pitcher starts with, was allocated to each tool based on that tool's predictive value of runs. So for example, you see avoiding hard hit contact is the most predictive of earned runs. So it starts at a score of 18. I'll now talk individually about each tool and show you all what the typical scores are. So the first tool, as previously mentioned, was avoiding hard contact. So this is evidence of a pitcher's ability to avoid a hitter's sweet spot. A pitcher starts his outing with a baseline score of 18, and barrels are most detrimental. So a launch angle and exit velocity with the minimum expected batting average of 500 and expected slugging of 1.5. The pitcher will lose 5.5 points for each barrel. He'll also lose 1 point for a high exit velocity, which is a batter ball event where the exit velocity is over 100 miles an hour, which means that the home run probability is over 10%. And then on the same vein, he loses about half a point for high launch, which is a launch between 22 and 38 degrees. The only way for a pitcher to gain points in this tool is for a pitcher to give up a foul ball, which is suggestive of the hitter not making clean contact with the pitch. You can see the formula there at the bottom. So the next tool is command, which in the big picture is the least predictive of runs, but we believe it encompasses pitching in its pure form. The pitcher needs to be able to hit the strike zone and avoid walks to be successful. So pitchers are penalized for walks, 2 points, and then rewarded for pitchers in the zone and on the corner. Next stat is game control, which is evidence of the pitcher's ability to stay in the game and control the count against the hitters. Pitcher is rewarded for a first pitch strike and a 1-1 strike. So we chose, you see the 1-1 strike is worth 0.4 and the first pitch strike is worth 0.3. That's because 1-1 strike is a high leverage pitch that tilts the at bat either towards the hitter or pitcher's count, either 1-2 or a 2-1 count. And then the pitcher is rewarded for each batter faced more than 2 times because it indicates he's staying deep into the game and controlling the game. And then the pitcher is penalized for each batter faced with runners in scoring position with less than 2 outs. We call that a high leverage situation because he's put himself in that position and he's on the verge of losing control of the game. Then last but not least, this wouldn't be a pitching conversation without talking about a pitcher's stuff. So a pitcher either has it or he doesn't on certain nights. And this is how the pitcher will be able to quantify that. So it measures his swings and misses, strikeouts, and anytime he can get the batter to chase and swing out a pitch outside the zone. So for example, a pitch that caused a swinging strikeout that was out of the zone gets a pitcher 1.9 points for that pitch. And then the next slide. So this slide summarizes the 4-tool metric in 2019. You can see on the left box plots there, the 4 tools are tightly distributed with no more than 11 points between the 25th and 75th percentiles. And then as you can see, the hard hit on the left, the green one, is most detrimental to a pitcher's 4-tool score, which someone at the bottom there getting shelled for close to negative 40 points in an outing. Then on the right, you can see the total 4-tool score, which is conveniently close to a 0 to 100 scale, and the mean is close to 50. So this kind of shows the beauty of the 4-tool or 4-tool metric, because the pitcher or the fan or the GM or the coach go as high level or granular as you like. They can look at the total score, each tool individually, or each part of each tool to the 10th of a decimal place. So the pitcher will be able to see where he compares to his previous outings or other pitchers in the league. So now I'll send it over to Jacob to talk about how the 4-tool score compares to game score 1 and 2.
Thanks, Cam. So now that we've kind of walked you through how the model is built and how the metric's built, we're going to compare the 4-tools method to the original 2 game scores. On the left of this slide, you can see the distribution across the 2019 season for each of the scoring metrics: game score 1 on the left, game score 2 in the middle, and the 4-tools metric on the right. You can see that the 4-tools averages are much more tightly clustered together than the original scoring methods. When we first saw this, we were pretty excited about it because it just matches our intuition that the average performances should all be binned around the same, and then the outlier performances being identified with the high scores in the 90s and the low scores below. We also were excited because while we didn't bound our metric to be between 0 and 100, almost all of our scores, with the exception of one at minus 0.2, fell within the 0 to 100 range, which we think provides a lot of interpretability advantages versus the first 2 game scores, where you could have scores upwards of 106, 105, and down to negative 20 for game score 2 and into the negative 10s for game score 1. One of our primary objectives, as Omar talked about at the beginning, was to try to develop a tool that could control for the outside factors that pitchers have to face every night. And so to test whether our metric was effective at doing that, we decided to look into the some park factor distributions. Here we have a little case study with the park that had the highest park factor in 2019, Coors Field in Colorado, and the park with the lowest park factor in 2019, Oracle Field in San Francisco, where the Giants play. On the left are the distribution of all scores of games pitched in those parks. You can see that in Colorado, there's a significant portion of the distribution with scores that are low, below 20. And the average for Colorado is well below the average for San Francisco, with an average of around 40 in Colorado, and an average around 60 in San Francisco. You can also see that there are many more well-pitched games in San Francisco than there are in Colorado. The distribution follows kind of the same shape around game score 2, except with even more negative performances in Colorado and a lower average at 40 exactly. When you look at the distribution on the right for how the 4-tools metric compares, you can see that there's no longer the skewness on the left side of the distribution in Colorado, and the averages are much closer together. They're both closer to 50, which we think is really exciting because it shows that at least somewhat we've reduced for the bias from park factor between Colorado and San Francisco. So this is a similar chart to what Omar showed at the beginning, but now with the 4-tools metric included, and it's ranked by the top 10 performances in the 4-tools score in 2019. As you can see by the boxes highlighted in red, there are quite a few differences in the top 10, but none of these differences are that significant. The most significant being Garrett Cole's 471 in game score 2 versus the 4-tools being ranked 9th. Garrett Cole would still fall in the top 10% of all pitching outcomes that we had in our 4,800 starts. So directionally, we can say at least the scores are aligned. So that's good. That makes sense. But we're also excited about some of the differences. One thing to note was Justin Verlander's no-hitters and how no longer scored first, it's scored third. It's still a really good pitching performance, but it was surpassed by Walker Buehler's performance on June 21st. Walker Buehler's game score 1 is actually a lot closer to his 4-tool score than his game score 2 score, because he was dinged for allowing 2 home runs. The first of which was a fly ball that hit the top of the wall and bounced over, and the second of which snuck by the right field foul pole line in the short right field corner of Dodger Stadium. The key takeaway is basically that we're excited about the differences. Because the goal of our model is to show the underlying performance of pitchers and not to just recreate game score 1 and 2. I'll try to see that our metrics may be more accurately showing pitching performance in the first 2 game scores. We put together a couple case studies. The first being one where both the original game scores rated a pitching performance as not being that exceptional, and our metric rates the performance as being exceptional, a top 10 performance, and that was Jacob deGrom's August 23rd outing. deGrom threw 13 strikeouts, including 8 in a row at one point, allowed 1 walk and 1 earned run on 4 hits. All 4 of those hits were singles, and as you can see on the bottom right of this slide, none of the 4 hits were very hard. The longest distance was 243 feet, and all of the other hits were below 100 feet. Only one of his hits had an exit velocity over 100 miles an hour, and none of them had a launch angle that we would consider to be optimal for a home run, meaning more than 10% probability of a home run. He only had 3 batted ball events with an optimal launch angle for a home run in the entire game, and his only batted ball event with an exit velocity over 100 was this hit I mentioned earlier. Rating deGrom on the 4-tool score, he performed exceptionally in avoiding hard contact in the 90th percentile. His only score that wasn't in the 90s in percentile was command, and at the stuff, he was 99th percentile for his 13 strikeouts, many of which were outside of the strike zone. The next case is a case where game score and game score 2 both rated Masahiro Tanaka's June 17th performance as being exceptional, and our metric just had it being as a relatively good performance. He had 10 strikeouts in that game, 1 walk, and 0 earned runs in 9 innings pitched. And the shutout line obviously turned people's eyes. He only allowed 2 hits, both of which were singles. But as you can see on the bottom right, both of his hits were actually hit really hard. His first hit was a single that hit off of the top of the right field wall and was really well played by the right fielder, and they were able to hold the runner at first. The second hit got deep into center field, but because they happened at different times and the exceptional outfield of the Yankees, they were able to hold the runner at first both times and avoid damage in either of the innings. Tanaka had 5 batted ball events in the game with an optimal launch angle for a home run and 5 batted ball events with an exit velocity over 100, which were quite a bit more than deGrom had in his game, and even at a barrel. This kind of shows that Tanaka was hit really hard in this game, but was fortunate that none of those hits ended up being for extra base hits or for even a home run. If we measure him on the 4-tool metric score, you can see that avoiding hard contact, Tanaka didn't rate anywhere near where deGrom did. He's in the 41st percentile with only a 5.89. His stuff and game control were excellent, and his command was really good too. But he was really should be viewed as fortunate for having avoided any more runs or giving up any runs, considering how hard he was hitting this game. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Trevor, our closer, to kind of close it out with some summarizing thoughts and some next steps.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. All right, so thanks so much for listening, everybody. We just wanted to take a moment to summarize the 4-tool pitching metric, and also just take a moment to discuss how we see it being used, and also some cases in which we don't think it's appropriate to use our metric. You can read our recommendations on this slide, but really the key takeaway is we believe that at its core, our metric is a great diagnostic tool for coaching staffs to adjust performance in game as well as post game and help dial up some of those adjustments with their pitching staff. For front offices, we really envision that our metric could potentially help identify players who may be undervalued on the market just based on their traditional box scores alone. We'll go to next steps. So we're very excited, like I said, with the potential of having this metric in use in game. So, a great next step would be some kind of app development that could really put this metric in the hands of coaches and pitchers in the dugout in game to help make those minor adjustments in between innings. We also do want to recognize that there is a need to continue to assess our model over the next few seasons. A lot of buzz around the league right now involving the newly manufactured ball. And there's going to be some need over the next couple of seasons for us to see how does this new ball impact hitting performance over time, and does that potential change in performance cause us to need to reweight some of our variables that are used to craft our model. So with that being said, I think we're ready to field some questions. Just want to thank you all again so much for giving us the time, and look forward to a great conversation here.
So I see a question. Why did you choose to exclude ground balls induced? So we looked, that was actually part of the data set that Vince sent us, ground balls and fly balls. And when we ran it through the ridge regression, it was not one of the highest variables likely for being predictive of runs. So we ended up pulling out ground balls and fly balls. And I believe that is still captured in the high launch variable kind of.
Jeremy had a question. You compare San Francisco and Colorado and made the statement that your metric does better of controlling for park factors, but could it be the case that Colorado pitchers were simply better than the other game score metrics captured for reasons other than park factor? That could be the case. We looked at other parks too. We looked at all of them. These were just two easy ones to show on the screen, and obviously were the most extreme, so you could see it. And there was definitely a tightening of all of the park factors. So the more extreme ones, like we looked at the Dodgers and the Rangers and all of the ones at the boundary rule, and you could see them all moving closer together. But on that specific example, it could be the case. But we thought we had enough evidence to say we reduced the park factor. Megan, why would this model be more useful for scouting lower velocity pitchers since there doesn't seem to be any dependence on pitch speed? I guess so. If they're performing better though, I'm not sure if it really matters. I don't know. Does anybody else have a thought on that?
So I would say they would do probably better on the the hard hit tool, because the exit velocity will probably be lower with a lower incoming velocity, but they would probably struggle in the stuffed tools because probably a lower swing and miss rate at a lower velocity. So it should even itself out in theory. That's an interesting point.
Have you explored, Chris asks, have you explored decisions on removing a starting pitcher based on your metric? No, we haven't really looked into that. I think for some context, we only had a week to do the case. So really it was all about collecting the data and trying to put together a metric and then trying to see the results of it. Some of those next step things kind of like Trevor mentioned were things you could really look at as you're watching maybe a game score come in throughout a game, or like the accumulation of hard hit balls, and saying like, okay, maybe more of these hard hit balls happened on that third time through the order, or hey, he's been hit pretty hard at this point and the game's getting away from him. But yeah, that's kind of a next step thing, we think. Phil, after seeing all the data, is there a particular pitcher you now look at entirely different light, be it positive or negative? We didn't, so it's tough to go through all the rows. Walker Buehler definitely popped up more in like the top 20 than he did in the other metric. So I'd say good for Walker Buehler, but I already thought Walker Buehler was a pretty good pitcher, so didn't change too much. But yeah, I guess we could dig into that more. That'd be kind of fun to see. Why didn't you include RBIs? So this was very similar to I think we talked about this with hits and all of the original kind of game score stats. And the goal was really to not have it be outcome based. We didn't want RBIs or home runs because then you're judging what happened You know, it could have been the park that caused the home run. It could have been a home run because it was in, or an RBI because it was in Houston, and you've got the short left field porch, right? But maybe the pitcher wasn't really hit that hard. And in most every other park, that wouldn't have been a home run. It would have been a pop out that would have ended the inning. So that's why we tried to avoid those outcome stats as much as we possibly could and find like surrogate values for them. So like hard hit balls, or you know, if the pitcher was in a high leverage situation when they'd be likely to give up an RBI. I guess we have a couple more minutes. Dan, will your formula and results be available throughout the 2021 season on a website? I'm intrigued by it after using GameScore for the last 30 plus years. Yeah, I think we should try to do that. I mean, like I said, we just got this a week ago, so haven't planned that far out, but I think that'd be really cool. And I'm definitely interested in tracking it throughout the season. That's kind of similar to the other one. David, how do you handle did you handle openers? We didn't have a lot of instances, I guess, where you easily classify it as an opener in 2019. I mean, we didn't really account for it, honestly. I mean, that you're getting a better score if you stick around longer in the game. That's something that I think is definitely should be monitored as that becomes more and more prevalent. I think we kind of talked about this. It's like mentioned at the bottom of the last slide, but you could really think about how to maybe adapt this methodology for openers and relievers specifically. I think that would be something we should look into if we had more time. More into the specific of the models in terms of target variable, feature transformations, and error of it. Yeah, we can. So originally we used like 3 machine learning models, and we used XGBoost for anybody familiar with R, a random forest model, and a ridge regression, and all were done with cross validation. The mean squared error for all of them was about 1.5, which if you would have just taken the components of hits, runs, or like, the components of game score that weren't runs, it would have been around like 1.3 or something like that, I think. So performed pretty well comparatively. That was the end model we chose, but we had other models where we ran them with, pitches out of the zone, pitches high in the zone. We had meatballs for pitches that would have been like deemed in the middle of the zone by StatCast. And we kind of just ran a bunch of them over and over again to kind of see which variables produce the best mean squared error of those models. And we realized that, maybe we could throw hits in and actually lower our mean squared error here, but that would have detracted from the purpose of what we were trying to do with, keeping it outcome independent as much as possible. I'm going to try to post our code or something if people want to look into it more, but I don't know. Do we have time for one more?
Go ahead, do one more.
No, that's more of a comment. And then Andrew, did you do this for the playoffs? No, we didn't do it for the playoffs, but that'd be really fun. Looks like that's all the questions. Really want to thank everybody for being, listening, and thank everybody at SABR. The competition was awesome. I know all the other schools probably had just as much fun as we did. So thank you. This is a great opportunity, and we really appreciate it.